Hi, everybody. I am Heather from Children's Book World, and I am super excited to be here with all of the Persisters today. Yay! This is our first sort of exclusive Persister Club gathering, and I am thrilled that Michelle Knudsen is here with us. She is the author of the newest She Persisted, Nellie Bly. And we are going to get a chance to speak with her. I know that some of you are here live. And if you are here live, please feel free to drop any questions you have in the comments or just comment and say hi. Tell us where you're watching from. If you're watching on the replay, well, hello to you all too. We're glad you're going to be able to see this. One of the things I wanted to make sure to do is to thank Penguin because they really worked hard to pull this all together for us because this is such a special exclusive treat that we have. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
So I want to sort of start off by asking you, this is a really unique series because it's not one person writing every book. It is multiple amazing authors writing different books. How did you get involved? And tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, it was actually by invitation. Penguin reached out to different authors and invited them to be part of the series. So that was really lovely to be invited. And the person they suggested for me was Nellie Bly, which was also very exciting for me because I first learned about Nellie Bly through Matt Phelan's wonderful graphic novel Around the World, in which he tells the story, well, you know, but for everyone else, he tells the story of 3 amazing journeys around the world, which is one of the things that Nellie Bly is famous for. So I had this connection to Nellie Bly already, but I didn't know much about her beyond just that little piece of her life. So it was so exciting to get to learn more about her life. And I've been so enjoying reading the other books in the series too, because a lot of these women I don't know a lot about. And so it's a wonderful thing to be a part of.
It is really fabulous series. And we are, anxiously await every month as the next one comes out. So I'm going to jump into a quick question because this is from Sasha, and she would like to know, and this is going to speak to what we're going to talk about next, but doing research for this, how many books did you have to read about Nellie Bly?
I read a lot of books about Nellie Bly. I should have gotten them all assembled. I have some of them here. This is the one I use the most, and you can see that I used it a lot in my research. This is a great biography by Brooke Kroger, written for grown-ups. I read all the children's books I could find about Nellie Bly. I read this book about her trip around the world, and actually there was another woman going around the world at the same time, which I didn't know about, and that was very exciting to learn about. I read this book, which is actually not by Nellie Bly. This is, I had to get it from a used bookstore. It's very old. It's very cool. And these are one of the things that inspired Nellie Bly to start her journalism career was she wrote a letter to the editor of a newspaper objecting to something that this man wrote in one of his columns that she felt was not. He didn't have a very good attitude about women, and she wrote a letter about that. And so I got my hands on this copy of all of his original columns, which was cool. My favorite thing that I read, some of them are in this book. Sorry, I've got a lot of stuff around my computer.
That's awesome.
Is this book. This is a collection of Nellie Bly's own writings. So her own writing about her experience of going around the world, writing about some of the other amazing things that she did, some of her own articles. And that was probably my favorite part of the research.
Well, you just talked about a gentleman who wrote a book, an article that Nellie did not like. And one of our persisters has asked this question about that gentleman. How did Erasmus, am I saying that right?
I think so.
And Nellie start being friends? Because in the book, it seemed like she didn't like him. But then I think there was a part that you mentioned where he actually knew where she was going or knew something about her.
Yeah, it's a great story because they did actually become very good friends. They stayed friends for their entire lives. But their first interaction was not very positive because he had written this column in which among other things, he was saying that a woman's place was in the home. There was a father who had written in to the newspaper complaining that he had 5 unmarried daughters and he didn't know what to do with them. And Erasmus was saying like, oh, it's too bad that like, we don't raise our daughters to be perfect housewives and, anymore. And Nellie was so offended by this that she wrote this letter. And she didn't sign her name. She signed it Lonely Orphan Girl, which was an interesting choice because she was not an orphan. But I think she was trying to make the point that there were women who had to work. For example, girls who were orphans didn't have parents to take care of them, needed to get jobs. And so she was already sort of putting things in her writing to try to get a message across to people. And so Erasmus was impressed by her letter. And so was the editor, George Madden of the newspaper. And so they invited her. They put a notice in the paper saying, like, please, come forward, whoever wrote this letter. And she came in and then got to know him in the course of, they invited her to write her own article about women. And so they started to get to know each other through the newspaper. And once they got to know each other, they admired so much about each other, but they had this very rocky start.
Interesting. Very interesting. So there's a lot of different parts to Nellie Bly. You read about, she did a lot of investigative journalism, and of course, obviously the around the world trip. Was there one aspect of her life that intrigues you more than the others?
Oh, that's a hard question. I mean, sort of one of the things that intrigues me the most is how many different things that she did. She really had this belief that she could do anything. And anything that she decided that she would not listen to anyone tell determined if somebody told her no. And that's probably what I admire most. She might be scared, she might be nervous about how it was going to go, but she would believe that she could do it if she tried hard enough. And then she would just do it. And she would convince other people of that too. There's a famous anecdote where she was leaving before the She had like 2 days notice to go on her trip around the world. And she went to have a dress made, and the dressmaker was like, that's impossible. Like, I can't do it. And she's like, you can do it if you want to do it. The question is, do you want to do it? If you do, then you can. And he was like, okay, then, and did it. And she had sort of this energy that she would share with people around her, which was amazing.
That is awesome. And so speaking of the dress, you had mentioned that she wore one dress, and we have a question from Olivia. Olivia would like to know, did Nellie Bly ever wash her one dress?
I believe she did wash it when she could, which was generally when she was sleeping, because then she could sort of be in her underclothes and let her dress dry out. But she didn't intend to just take one dress, and she did bring multiple pairs of underwear. She tried to pack 2 dresses, but she couldn't fit them in her bag. And she really only wanted to take one bag with her, partly because one of the newspaper editors had said a woman couldn't make this journey and break this record because she'd have too much luggage and it would slow her down. And Nellie was like, not me. And she was just going to carry this one bag. So it was a big deal for a woman not to have changes of clothes. Like, they took that very seriously, what they wore to different events and at different times. And for her to be like, I don't care about that. Like, this is what's important, like being a fast traveler and being able to move quickly. I'm just going to wear the one dress. But that's a very good question. Yes, she did have to wash it occasionally.
And it is amazing. It's amazing also to think of, I think, when I was reading this and really trying to sort of get into that time period and realizing, wait a second. So she took a trip around the world. She didn't have a computer to make a reservation anywhere. She didn't have a cell phone to look for directions to get from the train to the ship, or any of those things. I mean, everything had to be so planned out. Did it talk a lot about that in your research, about what would have happened if she missed a ship?
There were some close calls, certainly, on her journey. She relied a lot on the kindness of strangers, and the newspaper had tried to arrange some things, but they didn't arrange the whole trip ahead of time. So there was sort of a lot of figuring things out on the fly. And she took a detour when she got to Europe. She was told that she was invited to go and meet Jules Verne and his wife. And part of the inspiration behind this trip was Jules Verne, the author, had written the book Around the World in 80 Days, which was at that time an unheard of speed around the world. And Nellie wanted to beat that record. So she couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet Jules Verne. But it meant she had to skip 2 nights of sleep because she couldn't, there were only so many trains and boats. Like she couldn't get off schedule. So she took this detour to meet them and go to their house. But then she couldn't sleep for 2 nights to keep on traveling, to go on her way.
It's crazy. That is crazy. So one of our persisters wants to know, did you ever travel around the world like Nellie?
That's a great question. No, not like Nellie. I have traveled to many places around the world, which is a fun thing that authors sometimes, lots of people in their lives get to travel to different places, but authors often get to go travel as part of their job, either for research or to go talk about a book. I think the furthest place I have been to is China, where I got to go a few years ago because my book, Library Lion, this one, is published in Chinese, and they invited me to come there to speak about my book. So I got to go to China and Taiwan. The Library Lion is also a musical in Israel, so I got to travel to Israel to see that. So I've been to Italy a few times, mostly because of books. So I have gotten to travel to a bunch of different places, but I've never attempted to go all the way around the world in one journey. I don't know that I'd want to do that. It was a rough go.
I'm sure it was. But speaking of Library Lion, we did get a question from Kayla. She says, I love Library Lion. Yay. Is it harder to write real or made up?
I think it's harder to write real. I have written some nonfiction before, but never a biography. And most of my books are made up stories. And when you're making something up, it's hard to make things up too. And you want to make sure, especially in my longer books, you want to make sure that everything you write makes sense, and that it, you have to keep track of how far away things are, and what happened, and not break your own rules that you've made up. But when writing this biography of Nellie Bly, it was so important to me to get the facts correct. Yeah. And there were sometimes conflicting information. I would have to sort of hunt down what the truth was. And that was really important to me. So it took a lot of work, and I had to be really careful in a very different way than writing made up stories. That was a really good question.
So speaking of made up stories, so you have written, we have them picture books, and you've written books for middle schoolers, you've written books for high schoolers, you've written beginning readers, but this is actually your first chapter book for this age. What was it like writing for this age group?
It was a really fun challenge. I have some experience with this age group because I used to work as a children's book editor a million years ago, and I worked on the Junie B. Jones books, which are written for that same age group. So I spent a lot of time sort of working with another author who was writing stories in that age group, and I've read a lot of books in that age group. I think the hardest thing about writing for that age group is because well, for a book like this, for example, there's so much information. Look how big this one book is about Nellie Bly. And the print is really small. There's a lot of information. And I only had a little bit of room in this chapter book to try to fit in the most important things. So I would say the biggest challenges are sort of deciding what the most important things are to include in the book, and finding a way to write about it so that readers at that age group will enjoy reading it, and it's not too easy and it's not too difficult, because that's a very special. It's a very special range, the kids who are reading chapter books, because some of them are already very confident readers, and some of them are still kind of getting comfortable with reading. And it's hard to write a book that will be good for all of the people in that range.
It is. That is tough. That is tough. So a big piece of the book is that Nellie Bly was an investigative journalist. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about what investigative journalism is and what she did?
Yes. So she's considered one of the pioneers of investigative journalism. And that's when reporters not just sort of report on the news, but try to find out what the truth is about a topic. And what she would do is go undercover to sort of get the information. It's also, some of the things she did are also considered examples of stunt journalism, where a reporter will do something like dangerous or really unusual in order to get their story, like her trip around the world. The first thing she did that kind of started her on this path was she wanted to write more articles for the newspaper, a different newspaper. She had moved to New York because she wanted to be a New York reporter, because that was sort of her dream. And she was finding it very difficult to get hired because a lot of the newspapers did not want to hire women reporters. And if they did, they only wanted them to write about certain things, like hair and makeup. And she did not want to write about those things. So she suggested a story where she wanted to travel to the United States in steerage class on a ship, like a lot of immigrants did, to get to this country, so she could experience that, sort of investigate what that's like and report about it. And the newspaper didn't want her to do that idea, but they said, okay, if you're willing to do that, maybe you'll be willing to do this. We want you to go undercover into, they called, at this time, they called them madhouses. We would not call them that today, a place where people who were mentally ill would go. And at the time, mentally ill people didn't get treatment and help in the way that they're able to today. A lot of times they would just be locked away in these places that didn't take very good care of them. So Nellie Bly pretended that she was mentally ill, convinced doctors and judges and policemen that she was crazy, and they sent her away. And she got inside this asylum and experienced all these terrible things just so that she could reveal the truth to everybody else. So that's a great example of investigative journalism. She took a lot of risks in order to get at the truth of a story.
So we did have actually a bunch of questions. I kind of put it into one, which was what Anna sort of summed them up. A lot of kids were intrigued about when Nellie went undercover into the asylum. And the question from Anna was Nellie Bly scared at the asylum hospital?
She was definitely scared a lot of the time, because once she got in, she didn't tell people that she was a reporter, but she stopped acting as though she was mentally ill. She just acted normally, and and there were other women there who also seemed perfectly sane to her, who she didn't think belonged in the asylum, and the doctors wouldn't listen. The nurses were very cruel. The food was terrible. She found a spider in her food one time. It was scary. There's a part where they lock them all in their rooms at night, and she realized if there was a fire, they would probably all die. Like, there was no way for the way the locking system worked, there was no way for them to all get out in time. And she actually helped implement changes after she got out to make these places more safe, because she was so scared while she was there. That was a great question.
So Nellie was a writer in New York. You are a writer in New York.
Yes.
Fortunately, things have gotten better for women writers in New York. But would you give any advice to young girls in particular who want to take up writing? I mean, I don't think they all have to move to New York, but what would you say to kids between the ages of like 8 and 11 who think that they might want to pursue journalism or writing fiction or writing nonfiction?
Well, I think the most important thing you can do, there's two things. Top two things are to write a lot. Like, don't wait. Don't decide like, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a writer. Like, start writing now. If you're not already, write all different kinds of things, because you may think, I thought I wanted to be a journalist at one point. I mean, I like to write all different kinds of things, but I was going to go to school for journalism school, and I started writing magazine articles, and I realized I didn't like it as much as I liked writing stories and writing books. So you might not know what you enjoy until you try out a lot of different things, and also read everything you can, because again, you might not even know about some of the possibilities that are out there for you, unless you read really, really widely. And there's lots of things you can do when you're younger. You can write for your school newspaper. You can write for your yearbook. Lots of times schools will have a literary journal. And if they don't, maybe you should start one in your school. Lots of times you can start a club in your school if one doesn't already exist. You could do what I do and torture your friends by writing plays and then making them be in them in front of the class. might not make you very popular, but it's good practice. I would say just don't be afraid to try lots of different things. Don't be afraid to mess up. Don't be afraid. That's a lesson for all writers, I think. We write lots and lots of drafts when we write a book. I know a lot of writers, and none of us sit down and write a book in a day and we're done. We write them over and over again, trying to make them better. And if you try to be perfect when you're writing something, it's gonna make you freeze up. You're not gonna be able to really be creative. So that's probably also one of the top 3 things, is just try to be fearless when you're writing. Try not to worry about if it's stupid. Try not to worry about if it makes sense. Like, just write things. Just have fun with it and write things. And then you can go back and fix it up and change the things that don't make sense and improve it and change the words. But don't be afraid to play with it and have fun. That was a lot.
So, awesome. All good advice. All good advice. You talked a little bit just about editing and, changing things up and stuff. Was there anything that you had to leave out of the book because of the length of the book, that you wish you could have put in the book? Like, if the book had been longer, or for older kids, if you could write another book about Nellie Bly, was there any piece of something that just sort of sticks in your head, like, oh, I kind of wish everybody knew this?
There was a lot. I mean, she did so many things in her life. There were definitely lots of examples of articles that she wrote and people she interviewed that I would have loved to put in there. She was a very skilled interviewer, and she had ways of sort of getting people to open up, and she would get stories from people who other reporters weren't able to get any information out of. And I would have liked to have spent more time with that, because I think that was a really special skill. She also did a lot of work later in her life, especially. She did a lot of work trying to help children and trying to help women who were trying to find jobs. And there was one girl in particular that was almost like a foster child for her for a while. And I didn't really get to write about that in the book. There just wasn't any room, but that was a big part of her life as well.
So we had a question that just came in that I can't pop up on the screen, but it says, so in the book, she talks about an advice column that she wrote an advice. So what is an advice column?
So an advice column, you can find them still today in lots of magazines will have them, lots of newspapers have them, where people can write a question into the newspaper for any topic that they need advice with. And usually the newspaper or magazine will get a lot of questions, and they'll pick some of them, and the advice columnist will answer their question in the paper so that everybody can read the question and the answer. Because a lot of times, if one person wants advice about something, there's probably other readers who also want advice about that same thing. So you see it like in fashion magazines. People might write in for advice about makeup or hair. There's etiquette. I don't know if this is a thing that's still in newspapers, but it used to be a big thing where there'd be etiquette questions like how to behave in certain circumstances, or is it appropriate for me to send a wedding gift like 2 years after the wedding? Like, questions about the right way to do things. And there would be advice columnists who are experts on that sort of thing and sort of answer the question. And different newspapers or magazines might have different kinds of advice columns. But it's always a place where people can write in their questions, and somebody who is either an expert or who can have access to experts will answer their question and publish it for everyone to read.
Just like we got to ask you about writing and you gave your advice. So there, it worked. So there's one or two more questions here. Did Nellie have kids?
That's a great question. She did not have any kids of her own. She came from a big family. She was she had 4 full brothers and sisters, and then she had 10 half brothers and sisters. So they were all older than her, but there were lots and lots of people in her family. But she got married for a little while. When she was 30, she married someone who was 70 years old. After just knowing him for 2 weeks, they got married, but they didn't have any children together. And she never had children later in her life. So I think that was maybe one of the reasons why she was so dedicated to helping children. She liked to have children in her life. She didn't have any of her own, but she did everything she could to sort of connect with a lot of babies and a lot of children.
So don't think we have any more questions, but I am just curious because I read the book last night and I was like, there was so much I didn't know. I hear the name Nellie Bly thrown around. There's so much I didn't know. And it sort of has made me now want to go sort of investigate other famous women that I thought I knew about, but realized I didn't know quite as much as I thought. Are there other famous women that now that you've written this, you think, ooh, maybe I didn't know the whole story behind?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, yes, because there's so much that came up in the book. I'm trying to think of just one example. Well, one of the women that she interviewed was Belva Lockwood, who I did not know anything about. And she was the first woman who was allowed to argue before the Supreme Court. And she ran for president twice before women even had the right to vote. She sounds like a fascinating person that I did not know anything about. And so she's an example of someone I learned about during this research. Also, there were other women writers. Nellie Bly wasn't the first women writer, obviously, and other reporters who didn't do the kind of daring investigative journalism that Nellie did, but they still had fascinating careers, and it was very difficult for women to work as writers at that time. So I would love to learn more about them as well.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. We thank you so much for joining us and for being here with all our Persisters.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. So I just want to let everybody know, you probably already have your books. If you didn't, they will be arriving today, although I know many of you have gotten them because you've given us questions. If you're not part of the subscription service, you guys can just head over to our website, childrensbookworld.net, and sign right up. You can also grab, obviously, copies of any of the She Persisted books and any of, Michelle's books. And this was great. So I really appreciate you being here with us. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye.